This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. Welcome into episode number 80 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. I'm Noah Grant, joined alongside my co-host Nick Maxon here early on this Sunday morning. We have a heck of a show for you. A lot of topics to get to as the hockey world kind of starts to get rolling in the next week and a half or so. The NHL preseason is already underway at this particular point. College hockey is soon to follow here this week. Of course, our St. Cloud State Huskies, they've got a big matchup against St. Thomas coming up this week to start their regular season. And the women's hockey squad already underway with a nice overtime win yesterday. So we're going to discuss a little bit about that, a little bit more about the Minnesota Wild and some Kirill Kaprizov. I think we can finally put his name to rest as far as contracts and business is concerned, hopefully on this show for the time being. We're going to talk a little bit more about news around the NHL, and then our extra ice session is going to talk about some rule changes to the National Hockey League as well. You won't want to miss it, and we're going to get started with Center Ice View news and notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View news and notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Things started this morning. As you had mentioned at the top of the show, the women's hockey team is already underway. They already got their first win thanks to a 2-1 overtime victory. It was exhibition, however, against Bemidji State. It did take place at Herbridge National Hockey Center here just yesterday. Third period, deadlocked again at zeros. Yanina Newland, however, got the Huskies off and the game scoring first from sophomore Emma Gentry there. Then Gentry from Skridlova after the game would be tied and headed to OT, would end up sealing the victory, again an exhibition for the Huskies. Another women's WCHA action. Ohio State did sweep St. Thomas in their first Division I action. Mankato did best Merrimack in a 2-game set in Wisconsin. I'm not sure, Noah, if 18 goals is a lot or a little in 2 games. No, it's a ton. A plus 17 goal differential on the weekend against Lindenwood. Huskies will have a pair against that same team next week at home. That's their official scheduled opener. While the men team, again, as we mentioned before, opens up their Division I against St. Thomas. Fargo, North Dakota native Amy Promsberger. I think I hope Prommersberger. Yeah. Scored their first ever goal for the University of St. Thomas in Division I program history. Came in the second period early, and against Ohio State.
Yeah, kind of a tough go actually for St. Thomas. I think it was they were outscored. I think it was 10-1 on the first weekend. But you know what? They played a very good team in Ohio State. So I mean, we'll see how they adjust and they match up. I think they have. I want to say Bemidji next weekend. I could be wrong on that as well. But like you mentioned, the Huskies, they've got Lindenwood next weekend, and then they open their official WCHA action against the team that played Lindenwood in Wisconsin right away. So it's going to be kind of a good little shakeup and a good test for the Huskies next weekend to see how they kind of fare against Lindenwood, because they've got the big dogs in Wisconsin in that matchup the weekend after. So best of luck. Good start for the women's team. And it's a good sign that they're able to hang with this Bemidji State program, which We talked about that in the opener, and we'll talk about it a little bit again here. Is very important for this squad. The NHL did start their training camp and preseason schedules. We had kind of mentioned this week as well. Minnesota played last night on Saturday. They dropped their first contest to St. Louis by a score of 6-2. Kind of a rough outing for Kaapo Kähkönen once again against the St. Louis Blues. Tough sharp angle goal he gave up against James Neal last night. But St. Louis has not been kind to him, although they had a pretty NHL laden roster yesterday. But nonetheless, the Minnesota Wild unable to get the job done yesterday. The big news from the state of hockey, of course, Kirill Kaprizov. He signed that massive 5-year, $45 million contract before arriving at camp. Was actually in the United States for about a week or so before signing that deal, was able to jump in on Thursday, officially jump in on Friday, and he was raring and ready to go. Other restricted free agents did follow suit in the NHL, kind of waiting for that deal. St. Louis, Robert Thomas, and Vegas's Nolan Patrick, they each got 2-year deals, and Sabres defenseman Rasmus Dahlin, 3 years at $6 million annually for him. So those restricted free agents getting their paydays finally before the season starts. Some other NHLers getting some deals as we kind of get closer and closer to the season. A couple of goaltenders, Los Angeles goaltender, former Notre Dame standout Cal Peterson, 3-year, $15 million for him. And Columbus re-upping their netminder Elvis Merzlikins, 5 years, $27 million on that contract. Good for him. Sami Niku, he was scooped up after his contract was terminated by Winnipeg. He's going to Montreal on a 1-year deal. And Ottawa, they transacted a trade, if you will. Former first-round pick Logan Brown and a conditional pick headed to St. Louis for the big, heavy physical forward in Zach Sanford. Professional tryout news, a couple of guys around the NHL getting their shot, guys that the Minnesota Wild will know very well. Ottawa added Tyler Ennis on a PTO, and Arizona saw Alex Galchenyuk kind of return to their fold in professional tryout news. And the most interesting one, Detroit, they re-brought in Bobby Ryan, who tallied 14 points in 33 games for them last year, but he kind of missed the tail end of the season with surgery. He's 35 years old. That injury, I think they're just kind of wondering to see how he looks in camp before they officially sign him to a contract and give him that money. But a great return story and a wonderful progression of his career from what he had gone through to come back in Detroit and to do what he has done so far. So wishing him the best of luck, and all three of those guys best of luck in their professional tryouts.
Speaking of PTOs, no, just a quick side note. James Neal, who was on a PTO with St. Louis, definitely wanted to prove something last night. He had a hat trick in last night's preseason opener against the Minnesota Wild. And you just got to know that, after things didn't go maybe as well in Edmonton, I thought that he was a heavy piece for Vegas's inaugural run to the Stanley Cup final. You know that he's looking to try to, I think, prove some people wrong. And I think he definitely kind of showed that a little bit last night. But let's move into a little bit of news around the league. First of all, some retirement news. Longtime New Jersey Devil and former North Dakota Fighting Hawk Travis Zajac signed a 1-day contract with the club and then retired a 15-year career in the NHL. 14 of those in over 1,000 games with the Devils before being dealt to the New York Islanders last year to finish out his career. And it sounds like he's going to get a player development role within the organization. So good for Travis Zajac. Congratulations on a wonderful career, but stick it in hockey. Good to see that, the organization taking him in and getting his first office role. In the broadcasting booth, this one surprised me a little bit here, Noah, as Jim Houston, 42 years with CBC and Hockey Night in Canada, has announced his retirement. And I just, to me, the 65-year-old, he even goes back. I know that in the NHL EA Sports video game, he was kind of the main voice in the 2000s. Yeah, he even goes back in the 90s. He was the first voice I heard, even before Gary Thorne. So if I'm dating myself there you go. But the timing to me is a little bit odd on that one. It's, it's mid to late September when this news came in. I know that longtime TSN voice Chris Cuthbert was kind of pulled last year over from TSN to Sportsnet. Originally started his career with that same media organization. So maybe there were some writing on the wall there, but Jim Houston not being renewed his contract for Hockey Night in Canada. And unfortunately, he announced his retirement. So great career, great voice. And he's actually a voice I'm going to miss. I thought he called it really, really nice game. In front office news, St. Louis naming Peter Chiarelli as vice president of hockey operations. And then Ken Hitchcock also coming back to the Blues as a coaching consultant. Doug Armstrong, however, the current GM of St. Louis, getting a 5-year extension this week. So a little bit of front office news down there with the St. Louis Blues. This is a big one here. No, we now find a little bit more detail on the proposal that was submitted by the Arizona Coyotes for the Tempe Development Program. $1.7 billion was the dollar amount proposal that was turned into the city of Tempe. It is a multi-use sort of project, restaurants, shops, apartments. This is again on that 46-acre lot that was essentially a current landfill. It's right in the river. It's about 3 minutes away from the Phoenix airport, and supposedly a lot more access to the Arizona residents there in the greater Phoenix area. Looking for about $200 million in public contributions is what we hear from the Arizona Coyotes. And that's more for infrastructure work and stuff that would be on public land. And supposedly, this was the only proposal that was submitted in the plotted land. So there are no competing offers, which is interesting, Noah. However, it still has to be approved by the city of Tempe. So certainly not over yet there, but, as far as other projects, they don't have to worry about it. So as long as city makes it go through, then it's all right. As we know, the NHL did also approve the jersey ads, little crest, I believe 2 inches by 3 inches is the actual size. The Washington Capitals were the first one to actually reveal who they've already inked a deal with. Caesar Sportsbook, as you know, with the Washington Capitals arena, they also opened the first in-arena sports betting kiosk in North American sports. So that kind of made sense there. However, the league is looking to crack down on cross-checking calls. I think we're going to get a little bit more in detail on that with the goal to, I guess, get a little bit more offense and to sort of allow the game to play a little bit more freely in terms of puck possession. And then I guess in contrast, just a quick blurb, but this is sort of the same thing they did a little bit a couple of years ago with slashing infractions, although I kind of feel like that's regressed a little bit. But again, we'll get a little bit more of a deeper dive in that a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, just like the Arizona Coyotes, we're also looking for $200 million in public contributions. So if anyone wants to head on over to the Huskies Warming House podcast website, we do have a PayPal section. There was a little bit of a blurb I saw last night, too, as we roll into our final topics, some injury news and interesting topics here. There also was a blurb about Miami, Ohio, and Brad Aldrich and that situation going on with the Chicago investigation. There was an investigation, too, into Miami, Ohio's handling of Brad as well, too. They were cleared of wrongdoing. Apparently, the initial report against Brad when he was hired there came against him, and then he was subsequently terminated soon after their internal investigation was finished. And then a second report about Brad came to the university's attention about 18 months after Miami had released him, so it had no bearing on Miami's decisions. Still doesn't make it, any more of a feel-good story by any means, but something that I think our listeners should know that Miami section of that discussion has kind of been ruled out as far as wrongdoing, as far as the university is concerned. Moving into our final topic, like we had mentioned, a couple injuries litter the NHL. We did have a jersey being retired, and the Seattle Kraken, the newest NHL franchise, they've already set a record. In Philadelphia, we'll start there. Kevin Hayes, he's going to miss 6 to 8 weeks after abdominal surgery. Pittsburgh Penguins star Evgeny Malkin, he's going to miss 2 months after knee surgery. They're kind of ill-timed pieces there. Montreal's newly acquired forward Mike Hoffman, he's going to miss potentially up to 4 weeks with a lower body ailment. And Arizona's Phil the Thrill, Phil Kessel, he's slated to miss all of training camp with a foot injury, potentially out for about 2 to 3 weeks. I guess he injured himself during training a couple of weeks prior, and it hasn't really healed as much as he would like. So kind of hopefully not an ominous sign for the speedy forward who continues to get up there in age. In Buffalo and San Jose, the sagas do continue. Starting in San Jose, the Sharks, they're going to be without Evander Kane. The forward is subjected to an internal investigation by the team. And I think maybe the league, it kind of seemed like a joint thing, but for sure the team is definitely, they don't want him at training camp. We'll get into it later. But he was listed as potential wrongdoing that was brought to the organization's attention in addition to the charges laying blame to him gambling at NHL games. He was cleared of those essentially allegations, if you will. But potential wrongdoing is what the team is currently investigating right now. In Buffalo, the Sabres, meanwhile, they stripped Jack Eichel of his captaincy after he failed his preseason physical, of course, no doubt related to that surgery that he has preferred and was still not granted permission by the team to get on his neck area there. So saga that just continues to never end, unfortunately for Buffalo fans. Moving to Edmonton, former Oiler Kevin Lowe is he's going to have his number 4 retired to the rafters on November 5th. The retirement comes after 15 seasons that saw him win 5 Stanley Cups with the Edmonton Oilers, as well as another in 1994 with the New York Rangers. He was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2020. And lastly, like I mentioned before, the Seattle Kraken, they've broken a record. The team set a sales record for newly released NHL jersey in its first 5 days of availability, selling more than the previous record, which was actually the Vegas Golden Knights uniform in their first year back in 2017. The NHL did not release an exact sales number. Once again, welcome into episode number 80, the big 80 here as we move just around 15 minutes here at Showtime. To start off, my co-host Nick Max and I were starting here early on this Sunday, September 26th, just after 8 o'clock in the morning. Nick, it's been kind of a tumultuous end of the week, I think, for both of us in terms of business and some personal things going on. But other than that, how are you doing on this Sunday? And are you ready to finally get back into the hockey fold and see some games on the ice again?
Yes and no. That's a double-edged sword, but when the hockey season kicks off, it is nonstop until it's over with. So it's one of those where, from the broadcast side of it, Noah, I know you've been part of it too, where, your schedule just gets, overcome with hockey stuff. And it's wonderful, to go me wrong, but there are definitely some times throughout the season where you kind of look up at the sky and you go, I just need a minute to breathe, right? Just especially with the school, homework, and then of course working full time for me, it's a lot. You kind of honestly sometimes feel like you don't have time to sit there and actually accomplish everything you need to get accomplished. But I'm still looking forward to it. I'm really, really looking forward to see both the men's and the women's team this year. Again, the men who have fresh off of their national runner-up campaign last year, the women looking to finally take some much bigger strides forward in the WCHA. But at the end of the day, it's hockey, and you got to feel good that you get these opportunities. So bring them on. It's going to be fun. Noah, how about you? I know that school for you has also been ramped up pretty good. How are things going up there in North Dakota? Yeah, school's been good. It's been busy. I think we have kind of a quote unquote quieter week, although no week in nursing is ever really quiet, but it's been good. In the hospital, a bit of a slower week, thankfully, for clinicals this week. The week prior was pretty darn hectic. But I think the biggest news for me coming out of my personal and professional life, I actually got a job last week. I'm going to be, crazy, right? What the heck? Yeah, I had to pay somebody a lot of money for this. No, I actually got a pretty good deal. The Minot Minotauros and the North American Hockey League. I'm going to be doing color commentary and intermission reports for all 28 of their home games. They gave me a really nice offer, and I'm really excited about that. Piece. So all 28 home games, as far as I know, I should be available for all of them. And then potentially we'll see where the playoffs are at as far as that concern. I know the St. Cloud Norsemen are on the docket a couple of times up here in the greater Minot area. So I guess I was most pleased by the offer that came it came about actually because of the work that was done when I was at St. Cloud State, and then subsequently this podcast covering some Division I hockey. So I'm really appreciative of the journey that's brought me here. And we also have a couple of former Minotauros that were also St. Cloud State Huskies that I think we're going to bring into the fold as far as guests, hopefully in the coming months as well too. So some nice little connections that have been made there. And like you mentioned, back in the booth again, getting to get some reps around the hockey world and some pretty good hockey at that. Speaking of good hockey, Nick, we've got some women's hockey that just got done, and they're getting ready to continue to ramp up. In the men's hockey team, they've got St. Thomas and St. Thomas's first ever Division I action on the men's side. Let's start with women's hockey. I know it was an exhibition game, that 2-1 overtime win. Emma Gentry looking really good on the point side, of course. We talked about this team, definitely a group that has the potential to at least finish fifth, if not fourth in the WCHA. The big three up top are kind of tough to touch right now, I think, for any organization that's in that bottom echelon in the league. But they've still, the women's hockey team still off to a great start in their exhibition schedule as they get Lindenwood next week. How pivotal is this first win for the Huskies, and what do you expect out of them moving forward? Well, first of all, it's too bad it doesn't really count, right?
Yeah.
That's the one thing. But at the end of it, Noah, you have to. I mean, confidence is so huge for athletes, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of it, you have to. It's pivotal because say in an exhibition you get your doors blown off like 7-1, right?
Yeah.
Even though in the back of your head it's like it doesn't count, but you are you're kind of wondering what happened, right? So I think that the pseudo win is a good, it just gives you a little bit of confidence. Now I know that this team from last year, I think that second half of the season and that first half break probably wishes that was much shorter because the team I think was really trending in the right direction, but it's got to feel good. But again, you got to carry that confidence in the next weekend and also know that now these games start to count. So you can't take anything for granted. So prepare like it's your last game tomorrow and go from there.
Yeah, obviously excited for what is to come for this women's group. I know I talked to Steve McDonald about a month and a half ago. He's really excited about this group, their additions that they brought in. And this team has been a group. I know we say it, I know we say it in kind of a cliche sort of way, but this team really is on the rise and they've really got some great things that are coming for them. I also had noticed as well, there is some news as I hopefully get it pulled up. I believe the Minnesota Golden Gophers and St. Cloud State are actually going to be a part of the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame Winter Classic this year as well too. So we'll have to get some more information on that as well. But Emma Paluzny, 26 shots. Sorry, this is actually from February. I'm pulling up the wrong stat sheet. So ignore what I'm trying to say.
2 versus 9. Holy cow, your months are way up. I thought I was, sometimes on cloud 9 in my head. Oh my goodness. I've
been trying to be careful of the WCHA website for as good of a job as they do. And usually the women's hockey WCHA website is updated quite quickly. They don't actually have any live scoreboard information up from yesterday as well too. I noticed that last night. So kind of a little thing to pay attention to as well as they go through their transitional period as well. But St. Thomas, their women's program, you talked about, having not the best start potentially in your first games. They're kind of picking up the pieces there too. So I think the women's hockey program, they're in a good spot with now 8 teams in the WCHA here. On the men's side, St. Thomas, of course, coming to town, that matchup in non-conference / NCHC action, if you will. St. Thomas, what do the Huskies really have to prepare for mentally on the men's side? I mean, what is Brett Larson's message? And actually, we're going to have him on. We're going to record with him tomorrow morning. So exciting for Huskies fans on that one. But what is his message to the team heading into this weekend, not only for the first games of the season, but against a brand new opponent?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right. And that was actually the common theme that we heard from Spencer Meyer at Media Day was, they know that there's external pressure on them. But, even as athletes, I think the internal pressure is always higher than anything that's outside, right? You got to perform, you got to elevate your game and continue to develop every single time that you get the ice. But he's like, this is if, we prepare the same way at the end of the day, because that's what got us to where we were last year. And so we can't change it, so we just got to continue to do what we were doing last year to have success. And I know that, our sort of, kind of caveat was don't overlook St. Thomas. I don't think this team will. Again, when you're playing in the NCHC, where every weekend you're going to get the best every team has to throw at you every single weekend you're in that conference. I think that any team facing St. Thomas is conditioned to go, nope, I'm going to respect my opponent. I'm going to put my best foot forward and, making sure that we don't take anything for granted. And again, we don't know what St. Thomas is going to look like. They may surprise some people, right? So at the end of the day, everybody that's on that roster have earned a spot as a Division I hockey player. They're good hockey players. And, how quickly can Rico Blasi make that group of individuals who came in to act and, perform as a team yet to be seen. But again, they're there for a reason, so you can't overlook them.
Yeah, I think that five, what I was told, I think it's 5 former Minot Minotauros that's on the St. Thomas roster. Going back quickly to women's hockey, the one news blurb that I did read was correct, though. University of Minnesota, St. Cloud State, the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame Museum Women's Faceoff Classic, November 20th at Ritter Arena this year. So that one is on the docket. for this season. But yeah, when you talk about the men's team, exciting to see what they've got coming up. Like you mentioned, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And simply just take it shift by shift, those first couple shifts of the season, that first period, maybe just kind of get things under your belt. You've got a couple of freshmen and incoming players or transfers as well that you kind of want them to just settle down and get into a rhythm of things. And I almost think that in some ways it's easier to get into the rhythm of things knowing that you are playing a true Division I opponent. That's not saying anything negative about the exhibition schedule that the Huskies play, but you hope that if you bring your, I would say, B game against a team like, Manitoba or things like that, that hopefully that you have the stronger group in general. Not to say that it hasn't happened where, some of the teams in exhibitions have come in and beaten teams like Duluth or North Dakota, things like that. But that you're going to get a Division I test right out of the gate for this Husky squad. So I think it's going to be exciting. It's going to be exciting to have it at the Eichel Energy Center in a venue like that. It's just great for the game of hockey to see, a sixth Minnesota team enter the fold and see how they're going to be able to compete with their roster. I think they're going to be a group that they're not going to be all that bad this year. Some people have already written off St. Thomas. I don't know why, because it's not going to be a goal scoring disparity. Let's just put it that way.
Vegas has entered the chat. This is the exact yeah. Seriously though. I mean, it was the same storyline with them. We headed into their inaugural season, and then I'm not going to lie to you, that sort of underdog, chip on the shoulder, man, it kind of actually maybe kind of adore that franchise all the way to the Stanley Cup final. And if anybody wants to take a page out of how you enter a new team in any league and how you interact with the community and how you get success on the ice, I think Golden Knights is a really good example to look at. And even as a hockey fan, we've talked about this before, but even as the fan experience, the whole sort of identity of the team and the community, they make it really, really fun, honestly. And obviously they've had a lot of success with that franchise. So again, never count on a hockey team. You just can't. These are 25 plus kids that have earned their spots, have put in the work to be on a Division I roster. You have a very seasoned Enrico Blasi behind the bench. And he's very familiar with the NCHC conference, like a former Miami bench boss. So you just can't. Again, it's a real game that really counts. Like you said, there's no exhibition tune-up for the Huskies, so the start will be imperative, and so you got to go at it 100%. You can't leave anything out on the ice because again, the pairwise is back too, so any sort of drop in your non-conference could eventually impact you further down the road.
Yeah, great goaltending for St. Thomas too to look forward to this year. And they're wearing purple. My high school colors were purple, so I'm always just thrilled to see that. I know a lot of people are kind of hit or miss on the purple jerseys. I think their home whites look really, really killer in my personal opinion. Moving on to our trivia question we had this week here. Our trivia question did read on yesterday. We had a brand new winner. It was Owls 954 that was our winner, and he got this question. Last season, Kirill Kaprizov had 27 goals, putting him 116th all time for rookie goals in a season. Had he hit 33 goals in a full season, he would be in the top 50. What three Minnesota North Stars had 30 or more goals in their rookie seasons? Nick, there's three of them, like I had mentioned. Do you know of one of them at least that hit?
Dino
Ciccarelli was actually not in that list.
Really?
Yeah.
I know Madonna had 29, so he was short.
Yeah.
It wasn't Bobby Smith, was it?
Bobby Smith is in that list.
He is in there.
He had exactly 30 goals in 80 games played. He's number 86 on the list.
Oh, geez.
Would you like to phone a friend?
Can I pull the audience?
Yeah. The other two, Neal Broughton, 38 goals.
Geez.
38 goals in 73 games played. He's number 22 on the all-time list. Brian Bellows, 35 goals in 78 games played, 35 on the list for him. And then the other one that I think is actually pretty comparable, Steve Kristoff, he had 26 and 56 games played. So he was actually almost identical with Kirill Kaprizov there. But yeah, kind of sad to know that Kirill the Thrill didn't get his full season, because he easily potentially could have been a top 30, scorer as far as rookie goal scorers are concerned. So congratulations, Owls fan 954, on your first win in Huskies trivia history here as we start to wind down on that for season number 2. And speaking of seasons that are winding up with Kirill Kaprizov in the fold, finally, Nick, I know we talked about it on Wednesday with our guest, but finally, Kirill Kaprizov signing the deal that we were hoping that he was going to. No signing bonuses for him. full no trade clause in years 4 and 5 on that deal. The structure is kind of unique. I think it's, what is it, like $5 million this year, $10 million next year, $12 million, $9 million, something like that, where it's almost like a pyramid, if you will, or like a rise and fall in terms of his contract structure. Right. Nick, what were your thoughts on this deal for Kirill Kaprizov? Because I don't think we've actually really gotten a chance to talk about our true thoughts on it. Is it an overpay? Is it not an overpay? Is it a good investment in the future? What were your thoughts?
It's a little bit of an overpay, but at the end, especially for 55 games played, let's be honest. But I don't think there's anybody in the hockey world that will look at what he does on the ice and say that there's potential for like huge walk back, right? I just think that he's such a dynamic player that you're overpaying him, but you're doing that because you're trying to get that 5-year deal, right? This was sort of the 9x45, right? This was sort of rumored that framework for a couple of weeks. And what's interesting, Noah, too, was you had mentioned earlier that he was in the United States for like a week. He was actually in Florida with his agent. Yeah. And it makes you wonder that at some point, because we talked about how the Theofanis / Kaprizov side had been really pushing this side deal that was in the KHL. And, I had been very dismissive of that. So did Michael Russo, many others, really not understanding that from a GM's perspective, that would probably always be in the back of your mind. But as far as being a true threat, I think that was something that was good to get out of the way when September rolled. And even when the team itself in Russia said, no, he's not coming here. And
Kaprizov kind of echoed that himself in the press conference and media portions too. So
yeah, it's just, you kind of wonder. And I thought too, when that happened, does this change the negotiations? And I think probably it did to a certain degree, only because, again, this 9x45, that framework came out early this month, when we first heard about it. And, the things that Guerin was saying, especially to the media, we've made our best offer, we just have to be patient. You almost kind of got the sense that he had laid that down and said, this is, and I'm not budging, kind of say, that's kind of how I interpreted that. Yeah. And then obviously, some of the details, a no move clause. And again, no signing bonuses. You got to be like, holy cow, this is really not Chuck Fletcher. This is insane. But to be true with, the fact that they took the initiative, honestly, and, you kind of wonder if this was an agent driven decision, or maybe it was Kaprizov driven decision to get in the US, to get quarantined. Again, the one question I have is, he said he was vaccinated, but, again, the Russian variant apparently is not NHL approved, or unless do you have any info on that?
From what I had read is that he was vaccinated with an NHL approved vaccine while he was in Florida, like just coming into Florida. That's what I had read. I could be wrong. I think the biggest piece that makes it sort of happy yet frustrating, his work visa actually doesn't expire for another 4 days. So his last work visa doesn't expire actually until September 30th. So that's actually why he was in the States and was able to come over. So the thing that I think is frustrating is when I read the article in The Athletic from Michael Russo, Bill Guerin and Kaprizov had both kind of talked about the importance of how much better it felt for them to meet face to face. So Bill Guerin actually stepped out of a meeting, called him, flew down to Florida. They met, they had dinner, they had breakfast, and they talked in the afternoon about the contract negotiations and kind of solidifying things like that. And Kaprizov said, it was really nice to have him, talk face to face. Bill Guerin kind of echoed that sentiment as well. My thought is, if your work visa wasn't up until September 30th, geez, how nice would have been at about July 7th to have this conversation face to face. Right. And I understand travel. I understand the off season too, but it's too bad.
It's more than that, Noah, because, you get the sense, and this is where the chess pieces are really played by a GM, because when Kaprizov is, whether he's in Russia, whether he could be in Iowa, maybe that's just where he came from. Right. But if the agent is in control of all the negotiations and there's no ability to be face-to-face, right, and if the agent's leading the charge, right, there was, I think we talked about it too on our show as well, was, if Kaprizov were to step in, or if there was any sort of direct interaction with the GM and Kaprizov himself, that usually does go a long way to try to move, things from what could be a stalemate into something a little bit more, okay, we're actually getting the ball rolling to get something signed. So no question. That was a game plan from Bill Guerin going down there, not only for the opportunity to be face-to-face, but darn well the actual X factor was I need to see the player and to try to take some of the little bit of that vocal power away from the agent's hands. That's essentially what it was. So, but good on Bill Guerin to use that instinct to get down there. And, I think the biggest thing for both of us, Noah, is that he's in the fold, he's in training camp, and, you're trying to avoid, as we talked about before, him missing time with the team, especially here with the boys in training camp, and more so, preseason / regular season.
Yeah, as Seth Topolite put it, it's an overpay, but it's one that I'm comfortable with. And I echo that sentiment as well. I was talking with a friend, a former line mate of mine in college. He's a big Avs fan. And he goes, well, he's not Nathan MacKinnon. I said, he's not right now. But if he continues to progress, he could be in that caliber. And I think about Nathan MacKinnon's game, the dynamic kind of do it all. Kaprizov's not bad defensively. But when you watch Kaprizov and the things that he does, people say, oh, he had X number of points. Oh, is he going to be a goal scorer like this forever? The thing that makes Kaprizov good is not his goal scoring ability. What makes him good is his playmaking ability and his shiftiness, the way that he turns on his edges, the way that he creates offense on a dime in a phone book, essentially. So you're paying for a guy that I think a good comparable is maybe Jeff Skinner, right? Jeff Skinner has 40 goals, has an unreal campaign, gets a big payday, and has not lived up to that contract. Well, you think about it, same with Eric Stahl too. That one kind of came out of left field. He suddenly has this great season of production. And granted, Jeff Skinner's a good hockey player, but his underlying way he plays and his statistical value didn't mirror that in his career. And suddenly he had a breakout year and a contract year. Kirill Kaprizov, even when he's not scoring, has the tools in the toolbox to continue to create offense for this group. I think that's the piece. I mean, you look at where he would have been potentially in a full season for goal scorers for a rookie season. That tells you, I think, all you need to know, that some of the names that he's paired up with, guys like that don't just come in the league. Doesn't matter who you're playing, if you're playing quote unquote fluff teams or not. When you're a good hockey player, even if you're producing or not producing, the things you do on the ice kind of speak to that contract value for him. So good on Kaprizov there. Excited for him. Excited for what this Minnesota Wild roster can do, hopefully moving into the regular season. Pushing just after 36 minutes here on the show. So we do have a couple of quick topics that we want to get to here before we wrap up the main portion of the show. Some more Minnesota Wild news. Their new alternate captains, Marcus Foligno, Matt Dumba, giving the A's on their sweater. Foligno, I think, was a shoo-in by almost everybody's list. The second one was kind of up for grabs. Matt Dumba's the guy that's going to get the call there for his vocalism on and off the ice. Nick, what are your thoughts on both captains? Do you think they were the right picks?
Marcus Foligno, oh boy, I think even I had penciled him in as a potential, wearing the C candidate last season before it was handed over to Jared Spurgeon, which makes more sense to get the longer contract. I think Jared Spurgeon is going to retire as a member of the Minnesota Wild unless things go way upside down pyramid for the squad, but I just can't see that happening. As far as Matt Dumba, there's always been a part of me that despite what you feel as a fan about his performance on the ice, he is a very vocal person on that bench. He's a very vocal person in that locker room, and he has this energy that definitely is felt throughout that team. So I'm actually not surprised by that. And it's interesting how, love him or not, the fan base, is he going to be traded? He's not great defensively. He's missing that. Upper management seems every step that, in every little caveat we hear from the fan base, that management is kind of like, equal the sentiment, the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Bill Guerin said himself, Matt Dumba isn't going anywhere. You saw with some of the things, and I think Matt Dumba may have been part of a trade package if Eichel maybe had been healthy. He's not. And at the end of the day, they gave him the assistant captain. So again, you don't just hand those out like for anybody. That's an earned thing. And I'm not quite sure. I don't know if it was voted by the peers. I think usually that's how most NHL locker rooms go. So it tells you that he's also earned the respect of his teammates, unlike some other teams, which is another topic of our conversation. So kind of a nice little segue there.
Yeah. When you talk about the voting process, it's the players first, and then the coaching staff kind of has their input there. And then of course the staff and GM essentially kind of have the final say, if you will. So definitely taken into consideration there. I think about, the perception of Matt Dumba production wise versus what he brings to this team. Actually, in an odd comparable, Victor Rask is kind of in that same boat where everybody likes to, crap on Victor Rask, if you will, but he's usually at this point kind of in the lineup. He's in the mix right now. They've talked about where he's going to slot in as far as like line for training camps are concerned. There is something with both of these players that the coaching staff sees from a production standpoint or from a playing standpoint that warrants these guys being where they are. Matt Dumba is no exception. So for people talking about how they want him to be traded, that sort of thing, there's a reason he's on the ice every night. There's a reason he's a top 4 defenseman. There's a reason he's wearing the A on the sweater. So I think that's an important piece to point out. It's easy for all of us to be armchair GMs, but we don't sit in that locker room every day. We don't jump on the ice every day. We don't watch them every day to know what truly goes on. And there are some guys that are just, I think Matt Dumba is a great defenseman. I think he's still got a lot of offensive upside, but there are some guys that are also just glue guys in that locker room that mean so much as far as their personalities on top of their production on the ice. As we push into 40 minutes here, we do have one more quick topic to get to. Jack Eichel and Evander Kane, those kind of sagas are continuing. Nick, what are your quick thoughts on the latest Evander Kane stuff? And then what are your quick thoughts on the Jack Eichel piece here, still not being able to get the surgery he wants?
We'll start with Eichel. It's a no-win situation no matter what you look at it, right? From both the team's perspective and from Eichel's perspective, there's no question he was going to fail his physical. I don't think anybody should be surprised about that, especially with the neck injury. And the team is still standing pat in terms of what surgery they prefer. And it sounds like Eichel's camp is still standing pat, and whether it's just another wrinkle and trying to facilitate a trade. But the problem is, with Eichel not being healthy, his trade value is almost zero. So at the end of the day, until that situation goes somewhere, whether it's, they agree on one surgery or the other, obviously the rehabbing didn't work. That's going to be quite the tumultuous relationship for some time. So too bad for both that team and that player, because until that gets figured out, I think both sides are going to be very, very happy with each other. It's just too bad that, that continues to take place. For Evander Kane, this is interesting, Noah. I think what, is interesting is, a couple of things. One, the NHL did its own investigation first, and they found that there was nothing they could prove as far as some of the claims that were being made by, I think now the soon-to-be ex-wife of Evander Kane. That's a whole separate topic. We'll leave that one for another day. But they couldn't find anything to essentially substantiate the claim, right? Well, the San Jose Sharks have said, no, we're going to take a look into it ourselves, right? And I think that's an important sentiment here, Noah, because if I'm on a team, especially a professional hockey team, right, where I'm getting paid millions of dollars, now there's no question Evander Kane gambling problems, that's been very well documented. But if there was ever a rumor that came out that he was betting on my team's own games, someone please figure out if that's true. And until that happens, I don't want to see this guy, because that means that I'm putting all the effort in to try to win games, and this guy could give, 2 rats rear ends because he's trying to make money off of it. So the Sharks are taking a pretty interesting approach here. They actually banned him from training camp, which I thought was the right move. But what it also signals to me, Noah, is that there's some tension in that locker room. And, I can't blame any of the Sharks players that play around him that, that would feel that way. In fact, I think it was Kevin Kurtz, who covers the San Jose Sharks for The Athletic, had a very detailed article on some of those pretty high tensions too, that even some Sharks saying, I do not want to see him ever again, essentially. Even if it's, I don't know if that opinion would ever change depending on what they would find, but the organization really taking a deep dive into for Evander Kane, who is over $20 million in gambling debt, who is going through what sounds like a pretty nasty separation from his current wife. Things are not looking great for the San Jose Shark forward here. So you kind of wonder, let's just say this, what would happen if San Jose does find something, in terms of actual evidence against San Jose? Does that mean they terminate his contract? I'm kind of curious to see if the CBA has any language in that. I'm pretty sure there's a lifetime ban sort of thing that's in place for that. And, what would the Players Association, do in this situation too? So this is far from over. You kind of wonder if he will ever step on the ice Again, while the investigation is ongoing, or whether they'll keep him out throughout the duration. And let's just say that they don't find anything. Do they, is it salvageable, the relationship between him, the other players in the organization? So I don't know.
So
a lot of layers there.
I'll try to be brief here because I know we're over time, but we're doing a lot of the comparables game today here. And actually, I think that definitely the situations are far different in severity between these two people. But I actually think the closest comparable is in Major League Baseball right now. And that's the Trevor Bauer situation, where even if Trevor Bauer is cleared of what he's doing, do any of the teams in Major League Baseball want him back? Do the LA Dodgers want him back? I think Evander, Kane, he's over 30 years old. I think he's pushing in that same territory. Does another team want to take a chance on him with the conduct issues that have potentially been going on here? Does San Jose really want him in the lineup, or do they want to find a way to, kind of bury him or terminate that contract as well too? It's just sad because when you put all of that aside, he's a really, really good hockey player, and he's a very valuable asset on the ice for not only the San Jose Sharks, but probably almost every team in the NHL. I would say he'd be a great fit hockey wise in a lot of lineups. But when you just talk about that personal conduct piece, he's kind of digging himself further down the rabbit hole with his personal and professional behavior, if you will. And it's just, it's sad to see because he's a good hockey player, and potentially this contract could very well be his last in the NHL if things continue to kind of go the way that they are. Moving over to the Sabres and Jack Eichel situation, I know we've talked about this before. I know that people have made the comparison about the vaccine being essentially pushed, almost required for NHL players versus things in the CBA related to personal health, such as surgeries. From a personal medical standpoint, I just think it's still shameful what the Buffalo Sabres are doing with Jack Eichel's situation. I know a lot of people disagree and say that he signed that contract under the CBA. He is now an asset of the Buffalo Sabres. I understand that, but
it's not helping anything.
Exactly. To not essentially allow a player. It's one thing if he says, hey, I want to do black voodoo magic and poke myself with sharp swords to feel better. That's not backed by empirical science. That's one thing. But when you have an alternative therapeutic method for him on his road to recovery that is shown to have empirical evidence, it's shown to have the backing of over 1,000 of these surgeries in other walks of life, including athletics, I don't know why you would treat somebody like that, regardless of if you want him on the ice or not. If my employer did that to me and I had the ability, I'd walk away. Day one, I'd walk away.
It's tough, Noah, too, because I understand the Sabres' perspective in terms of, yes, there's 1,000 surgeries documented, and as we mentioned before, there was a podcast from the doctor who was, kind of been working with Eichel to try to perform the surgery. He was kind of the pioneer in it. But I do understand, at least, not that doesn't mean I agree with it, but I understand the Sabres' perspective in terms of, okay, I see all these things in other athletes, but I haven't seen this in a hockey player. And I understand that maybe you're looking at it from the set of, well, hockey players, the game is different, it's faster, it's, heavier collision. Is there really any evidence is to say that this has helped hockey players in the past? From what I understand, if I remember the podcast correctly, is that there had been surgeries on different levels of hockey players that had performed this. And no, again, I'd have to double check.
Wasn't one of the groups that was listed was like fighters, like MMA fighters. They had a couple of them.
That's correct.
That's the piece. And I just, from personal standpoint, fusions as you age, just don't get better. And it's like,
and you'll need to actually get it redone.
Yeah. It's like, I understand that you want him to, get that surgery. I understand you want him in the lineup, but at the expense of his health, how old is Jack Eichel? Is he 24, 25 years old?
Yeah. 24, I believe. Something
like that. It's like, beyond the hockey piece, this is a decision that will affect Eichel's life, the rest of his life. And that's something that I really think has to be taken in consideration. And that discussion has to continue in some way between Eichel and the Buffalo Sabres. But honestly, no pun intended, it's been really painful to watch. It really has. So
it really has. And then just a quick wrap up here, before we get to extra ice. The one thing that even, as I go back and look at the Sabres, sort of sticking point, which is it hasn't been done. at some point, which piece breaks first, right?
Yeah.
And I know that the agent change in Pat Brisson, was supposed to sort of facilitate hopefully some ground moving. And I think the million-dollar question is for Jack Eichel. Obviously I think the relationship is torn beyond repair, despite what, Kevin Adams says. Yeah. But you kind of wonder for Jack, who obviously is aching to play hockey. We're not, you kind of wonder if there's something even in the back of his head that says, I'm just going to cave, get the fusion surgery just because I'm just sick of this, this back and forth. And you hate to not think that way, but I kind of get the sense that, as the frustrations mount to that, you can't really rule that out either too, Noah. You kind of wonder if then maybe that's the long-term game plan for the Sabres, just to maybe just hold out until maybe he just gives up on it.
Which is awful.
No, it is. And that was going to be the closing point is, this is not just about a surgery that's supposed to help him with his job. Again, with anything with their spine, any surgical procedure, really, there are implications on, your quality of life that can happen and go through all the way down, to your golden ages. Right. And especially with the spine and this kind of injury, absolutely can affect that. So it's, like I said, it's a terrible situation. You can just hope we get some resolution at some point soon.
So funny story, Nick, doctors, I'm in the nursing profession. The business world obviously works a little differently, but funny story, unless we have to implement life-saving emergency procedures, if you come in and you have some sort of ailment tomorrow, right? And I say the best recommended option for you is this. You can also do this, but the best recommended option for you is this. And you look at me and say, nope, I don't want any of those operations. I just want a glass of orange juice and I want you to leave me alone. I, as a medical professional, have to respect that because that is your right as a patient. It's utterly mind-blowing to me that the business world right now works differently because every decision that affects the patient is allowed to be made by the patient and potentially their family members. And it's just, it's so mind-boggling to me that Jack Eichel cannot do what Jack Eichel needs. Now, I understand within the CBA a little bit to say Jack Eichel can't go drive a speedboat at 200 miles an hour, break his neck, and then ask for the Sabres to pay for a surgery. I get stuff like that, but yeah.
So you're opening up a can of worms, and I'll just respond very quickly. Mind you, people give GM Kevin Adams a lot of grief on this. Honestly, it's coming from the team doctors. They're the ones that are doing the recommending. So these are health professionals that are, probably been in and around the game of hockey for a while. And, for those who say, well, surgery, this, that, what's the deal? First of all, just like the Austin Matthews thing, right? Surgery from a medical perspective is a last resort. In fact, most doctors take the approach is if we can avoid surgery, we need to actually do anything and everything, whether it's rehab, physical therapy, no matter what the injury is, to try to avoid surgery, right? It's never good on your body to go through surgery, but it ends up being where all other options are exhausted, then and surgery is the last option to fix something. Then absolutely. Now, and it's just interesting to me that that these medical professionals, especially with Buffalo, Buffalo, for those who don't know, that area is littered with medical colleges and medical universities. It's a huge area for that. And you kind of wonder, as far as things go, what sort of things that those doctors are looking at from the Sabres perspective, because that's the one thing, they have access to all the medical files for these, surgeries to look at, to kind of go through, to read through it, and to make more informed opinions than either I nor you could ever do. Right. So you kind of wonder what they're looking at and what's maybe what they're questioning. I'd be very curious to that. So
the piece that's missing in the CBA, just like it should exist in any healthcare forum, is patient advocacy. and the rights for essentially someone, even in a business per se, to have control over their own health to a certain extent. So that's the piece that's a huge legal issue that you or I are not privy to. I don't think.
Right.
And it's a mind-numbing topic to talk about even in our profession too, and things that we have to do and stuff like that. But yeah, we are way over time, so we're gonna get off this topic. Let us know what you think either on Twitter at @WarmingHouseDen or in the comments of whatever streaming platform. Of course, you can find us on YouTube as well. We're gonna head on to the extra ice session, and we've got some comments of our own as far as a rule change is concerned in the National Hockey League. And welcome into the extra ice session. Nick Maxon is to my left, I suppose, if you're looking on the YouTube page, and I'm on your right-hand side, depending on what you want to do, unless you're cross-eyed. And I feel cross-eyed very often in this world, Mr. Maxon. But speaking of crossing, how about cross-checking? The National Hockey League announcing that they're going to have stricter and tighter enforcement on cross-checking in the NHL, especially in those high traffic areas, around the crease, around the slot, where you kind of see defensemen historically essentially burying forwards flat on their face. I think the most infamous example for the Minnesota Wild was that Eric Stahl a couple of years ago in the playoffs against Winnipeg got cross-checked right in the slot and a pretty big scoring chance and kind of knocked him out for a portion of that game. Nick, the last major quote unquote crackdown was the slashing crackdown back in 2017-18. What is the NHL truly trying to say, and how are they actually going to enforce something like this? And is it necessary?
I think that there are some points that are necessary, to be honest with you. And honestly, let's look at it from both a officiating perspective as well as a fan's perspective. I think it's important to cover both. So, as you mentioned, the rule itself isn't changing. So I want to make sure our listeners are clear. There's no added verbiage. There's no change in how the rule is read or written. Yep. So that part we have to make sure we're clear on. Number two, all this is what the NHL calls is a clarity of the interpretation of the rule. So the video that the league actually posted to actually explain what it was looking for, they're focusing on three areas. They're focusing on areas around the boards. They're looking at areas in front of the net as well as open ice. And so I watched the video and looked at examples of what they would look at in terms of what wasn't called before and what will be called. So let's say you're battling the boards, right? Now, what I understand is if a player goes down, that's going to essentially, in a much truncated form, that's going to draw the arm going up. Basically, if you're cross-checking around the boards or pushing and it's not interfering the player's ability to be within the play, they're going to let that go, right? Yeah. However, if excessive force is used, if the player is essentially taken out of the play, even if he is involved in it, they're going to call that cross-checking. Same thing in front of the net. If there's a little bit of pushing and shoving going on, as long as the player can maintain his stance, can maintain his involvement in the play, they'll let that slide. If a player is, Brad Marchand in the back of the kidneys, they're going to call it. Open ice too. If it's almost like, this is where the open ice thing is going to be interesting, because half of the time for a cross check when you're moving an open ice, it's more of a push.
Yeah.
But it sounds like they want to call that too, especially if the player again is either taking off his skates or again is I guess interfered with his ability to make a play. So essentially, what the league is trying to do is they want more offense. They want obviously player safety. At least that's what they're saying. You thought offsides rule was going to be vague and gray. This is going to be no different. And we've seen rule crackdowns sort of in the past, Noah, and it's always curious to every time the league does it. First of all, how teams adjust. And also how long they actually last, right? I still remember when the whole obstruction verbiage came into the rules, 10, 12 years ago, I want to say, yeah. And how it was like obstruction. Why don't you just call it interference? It was actually kind of funny at the time. But, those slight little interpretations from the officiating standpoint, that's what this essentially is. So they're looking for any sort of, stick being used on a player to essentially take him out of a play, either by force or, by some other method. They're going to start calling those. And Safety wise, yes, especially against the boards. Zach Preseason, I know his career was taking an absolute beating in the back while he was net front battling. The story with him and his health was a big issue for the Wild a few years back, and it still is for him. Again, you talk about anything with a spine, that's a long lasting injury.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. You kind of wonder where each referee is on what the NHL wants, right? Because not every referee calls it the same way. Again, it's subjective calls for any official. And I'm kind of curious to see once we get into the regular season, what sort of calls we're going to be seeing made. And, if some of those were calls we've never seen in the past and how picky they're going to be. Because I know that when they've done rule changes in the past / interpretations, or I could call what I say rule focuses, I think is what they call it.
Yeah.
Just how much are they going to call. So it's going to be interesting.
Could be worse. We could be discussing what the heck catch is still in football. Oh, and
still are.
And speaking of football, how bad are the Golden Gophers right now? But anyway, I digress.
Oh boy, don't even get me going on that.
Watched that one yesterday. I had a couple friends at the game. Not pretty. But nonetheless, apparently you have to score points to win a football game. Nonetheless, I think that the cross-checking piece, I guess I see it a little more black and white than you do. And I think, it's like any rule. I think it's tough. I think probably the only rule in the National Hockey League that is so clear cut and dry is probably tripping. Pretty obvious when somebody trips, for the most part.
About as easy as it gets. Right?
Yeah, I would say. I think the two factors that go into what makes a cross check are body position, like you mentioned, and time. Puck possession in relation to body position too. Because what is your ultimate goal as a hockey player? People say, why do you cross check? Why do you make body contact? Why do you do those things? It's not to run somebody into the fifth row, although there's some people that you see that you're like, boy, I'd really like to do that if they have their head down coming up the ice. But the purpose of a body check, a little slash, a little cross check, it's to disrupt the opposing player and essentially gain an advantage on the puck. I know that sounds obvious to people, but some people don't know that's what the reasoning is. We don't cross-check people just for the sake of, breaking backs. Like that's not the goal. It's to create separation from the puck and the player that currently probably has the puck. You're trying to gain every little advantage that you can. I think number one is it's similar to kind of boarding and checking from behind, especially on the wall. When you see a guy who's trying to change direction or trying to go a certain direction and he gets disrupted in that action, it's kind of obvious, especially when they go headfirst into the boards, where that direction change has happened. Like it's a very cut and dry piece. So I think that's the first thing you're looking for is if I'm trying to change direction and I'm going to my right, I stop and turn to my left, and all of a sudden I'm not going left anymore and I'm going forward straight into the boards. Well, it's quite obvious you disrupted my path of trying to do something versus, if he continues to go to his left, but you're still giving him little shots as he goes around, but he's still able to make his move going to the left as he's going up the wall. Well, then it's kind of like, unless you're giving him 7 shots, 7 straight cross checks, it's kind of at the official's discretion, if you will. The other piece is time. And what I mean by time is that, when guys battle in front of the net, sometimes guys lose their balance, that sort of thing. But again, if you get cross-check and you drop down to one knee and then you hop right back up and you turn and you're right back in the battle, well, I'm not calling that as an official because it really didn't have a whole lot of bearing on the play. And it took half a second for the guy to drop down, stand back up, and he's back in the play versus, if you're cross-checking him and he's laying flat down on the ice and it takes him 3 seconds to get up. Well, that's quite obvious what's going on there too. So I think that's what you kind of have to start with is you're looking obviously at severity and egregiousness of the play, but on top of that, it's, I've seen guys that while they're battling and going to the corner, they do get cross-checked and they drop down to one knee, but they're able to stand back up and maintain position of the play. And they don't get another cross-check or 3 to the back. And the play kind of continues naturally, if you will. It's when you really disrupt or alter the momentum or position of the player or play that I think that's where it really has to be enforced, I guess. The one that I have the question about actually is standing cross checks, is guys that are along the wall and they're trying to step around a guy and they essentially get one of these and they just get pinned up against the boards and they're essentially out of the play. Like that's like a cross check / hold. And I don't know what you do about that, unfortunately.
And again, it's one of those where, just to go back briefly on your point, Noah, based on the video again, and I would highly recommend anybody else watch it. It's right on YouTube. It's widely available. As to what the league's looking for, it sounds like, despite the fact that in your example that player is still in command of the puck and possession, if he's knocked to his feet, it sounds like they want to call that. And again, is it a safety issue because you're like facing the boards? Is it, in front of the net? Maybe, is it different there? I don't think so. I think if you're taking out from your feet, you're going to see a lot more arms go up, even if it doesn't necessarily change what the advantage, as you very eloquently describe, as of the play. I think they're really trying to effectively, if I'm looking, they're trying to put a rope on the excessiveness of the cross checks. I think they're okay with the pushes. I think they're okay with the shoves as long as the player is on his feet. I think they really want to keep that physicality as you get mentioned, because again, if I'm a player sick and I get a little nudge and it just happens to be at the right time and I lose possession of the puck and it's a turnover, that's exactly why you do those things, right? It's those little plays that end up making a big difference. But if it's hard enough where I go to my feet, it sounds like they're going to call every single one of those.
And there's two issues with that. The first one, of course, as you know, is players that dive. I mean, it's very easy to dive and essentially knock yourself off your feet, but still kind of maintain control, if you will. It's kind of hard to explain to someone who's never played, but you can have Dustin Byfuglien going into the corner against you, but if you push him at the right time while he's turning, you can knock him off his feet because he's not expecting it. I think the second piece that you're really going to see, I think you're going to see defensemen, especially, you're going to see their hands go from being here to down here. And you're going to see, instead of the cross checks down in the lower back or in the shoulders, you're going to start to see the gloved portion, their actual hands, down on kind of where the hips are, so that it looks like that they're not cross checking, but that they're maintaining body position and essentially using their hands and forearms and shoulders and hips to knock a guy off the puck and disrupt them, essentially pushing on the hips, if you will. So it's kind of like a pseudo cross check. Is that the best way to kind of put it? Where you're trying to gain that positional advantage or disrupt momentum, but you're not actually, 1970s breaking wood over somebody's back. You're giving this little kind of push and disruption, because as you know, when you have a guy who's going 10, 15, 20, 25 miles an hour down the ice, one little disruption or one little push, when Dustin Byfuglien, for example, is changing direction in the corner, sometimes that's all it takes for a guy to drop down. So where do officials, as you mentioned, that's where officials are trying to draw the line. How do officials handle the potential diving? And also, where do they draw the line between a true and honest cross check versus, pushing with the hands and hips to try to slowly disrupt somebody? Is there a way for them to do that?
At the end of it, first of all, they did mention the diving aspect in that video. To the, again, with referee subjectiveness, what's considered a dive, right? You want things black and white, but the problem is with essentially every single rule except for tripping, it's all gray area. So it's, I don't know if there's a way you can really draw those circumstances, and that's where you're probably going to see certain players, especially because you see this in the NHL too, where certain players who've had, say, the referee's eye when they go down, per se, right? So you kind of wonder if you're going to see a little bit of bias too, and with some players, going down easy or whatnot. Because you mentioned Dustin Byfuglien, for a guy his size, he was 6'7", 230. If he looks a certain way or goes down a certain way, that probably wasn't crazy. I don't know. At the end of it, it's tough. And, it's sort of the same deal with the NFL referees, right? It's, what's pass interference. It's, every crew is slightly different, and it's no different than the NHL, right? You only just hope that, they can be as, consistent as possible as a group throughout the entire year, between the referee pairings and the linesmen, when they're doing their job. So it's not an easy task, especially again, when technically the rule isn't changing. You're just trying to enforce a little bit more of probably what you should have been calling. The quote from Michael Russo was, "This isn't a a tighter calling of it. It was not. It's not ignoring what have been blatant penalties for the longest time." That's how he worded it.
Yeah.
And I tend to kind of agree with that sentiment.
Yep.
So I don't know. Well, again, we won't know until we see it. Again, I didn't get a chance to watch the preseason game yesterday for Minnesota. I think only St. Louis had it broadcast locally. I don't think Minnesota had picked it up. It was just on the radio. But you kind of, because usually they start trying these things out in preseason too, as, try to get the referees in the fold too. They're just like athletes, they got things they got to work on and practice. So, but we really won't see, I think, a full-blown attempt until they get to the regular season. And, as we saw with the Minnesota Wild, if they're always in the penalty kill, they're taking too many, or if they're on the power play and they can't get anything rolling, could be some ugly hockey to be played, could be sloppy. So you kind of hope it doesn't get overbearing either.
Yeah, there's two areas in terms of cross checks that they got to be called, if anything. The first is when players essentially are coming out of the corner or entering the corner, and they're changing direction or trying to kind of squeeze by a guy, and they end up kind of going like half face first into the boards, and they lose the puck. I mean, that one doesn't get called often enough, because I think that there is that gray line sometimes with people like physically, was that a check or was that a cross check, kind of this in between thing. And there's so many of those as a forward. It's the worst feeling ever to come up the wall and try to change direction, and you get, two hands or a stick in your back, and you're down on the ice and the play's going the other way and you don't get a call there. It's like, what more do I got to do to get a call there? The second one, and this one is probably the more common one that people know, is anytime that there's a shot coming in on net, especially, and a forward or a defenseman is trying to go for that loose puck as the shot's coming in, and they ended up flat on their face. And the one player was standing directly in front of the other. Those ones got to be called every time. And I think that one tends to get missed a little bit more in the chaos of everything and what's going on. And for so long, defensemen were taught that if anybody comes near your goaltender around the crease, you bury him. It doesn't matter what you bury him. And I guess I understand that to an extent, protecting your goaltender. I've always hated that about defensemen, and I'm probably in the minority there, but I never understood as a forward, if you, obviously I'm going to compete very hard, but as soon as your goaltender covers the puck, as soon as I hear the whistle, like I'm not going to, slash, over top of your goaltender's hands. I'm not going to run him over, that sort of thing. But defensemen all the time, every time you go into their grill, they're grabbing you by the jersey, they're pushing you away, telling you get out of the way and stuff. And sometimes it's kind of like, I get you're protecting your goaltender, but why did you cross check me there? I was 5 feet away from your goaltender, that sort of thing. So I think it hopefully will improve the flow of play a little bit, or at least around the front of the net, create second chance opportunities, because defenders have to defend more with their stick and their IQ and their awareness of players on the ice, as opposed to just clutch and grab or kind of burying them, in front of the crease there. So, Nick, do you have anything else to add on that cross-checking rule? I guess my final closing question would be, do you think that we're going to substantially notice the change or the adjustment, or do you think it's going to be a gradual thing? Because I remember a couple of years ago, the goaltender interference thing was a very oh my gosh, this is a little bit over the top.
And I think that's what you're going to see, honestly. Typically for the NHL, anything that they're looking for as far as rules, I know that the league and the governing body that is in control of the referees, they make it a very much a point of interest. So I do think you're going to see it to a point where maybe it's going to seem overbearing, because that's the way we've seen these, whether it's a rule change actual in the verbiage, or whether it's we're focusing on this, like the obstructions or slashing in the past, right? It was like, that's not a slash, that kind of thing. But and again, the league is very, they'll stand pads like, no, that wasn't in the past, but this is what we're calling now, kind of thing. So I do think it's going to be the latter. I think it's going to be where it's going to seem like it's much to the fan base. I think it's going to be even more so frustrating for the players and the coaches that go around in the league and to try to understand. It's almost like you're trying to understand what the strike zone of a certain umpire, right? Is he off to one side? And again, that's sort of that one caveat that I had, was if they're consistent with it and teams can adjust, at some point things will eventually work itself out. But if one night they're very, very picky on it, and then the next night there's a crew that doesn't call a single one, and the same acts are happening on the ice, that's when you're going to see trouble throughout the league. So you just kind of hope it's, it's been taught very well to the referees. They've done their homework on it. They know exactly what the league is looking for. But at the end of the day, every crew is different. And again, with these sorts of, I don't know, because they're technically not changes, but points, of
emphasis.
Point of emphasis. Thank you.
Yeah.
You usually see a bit of an overbearing response to that from the officials.
Well, we have the electronic strike zone. Why don't we have electronic officials, Nick? Come on, figure it out, man.
Oh God.
That will do it for episode number 80. We've got an exciting lineup. We've got some guests on the docket here again. Tomorrow, of course, we're recording this on Sunday, September 26th. Tomorrow morning on Monday, we're going to record with Brett Larson, previewing his thoughts on the upcoming men's hockey season, as well as the weekend against St. Thomas. That'll be out either Monday night or Tuesday morning at the latest. And then, of course, we've got episode 81 coming up the following Sunday. And then we've got Alex Micheletti coming on the show the following Monday night. So his will be out Tuesday morning, the following Tuesday morning on that one. Talk a little bit of hockey, Minnesota Wild stuff, and then probably preview a little bit of that Mankato series, as he is a Mankato alum as well, too. So we got a lot of exciting things coming on as far as both Minnesota Wild and St. Cloud State hockey is concerned. It is finally hockey season. We are finally ready to rock and roll and go, and we couldn't be happier to have you here with us here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. We appreciate you joining us in the den. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon.
One-timer, come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.